Hey, my name's Dave McCall. I'm with QTS. For those of you that are new to Henrico County, we've been here for a decade. Welcome to the party. QTS, you're welcome. You're welcome. I remember not too long ago when people said Richmond, Henrico. Now we're crazy like a fox. I love it. For those of you who don't know, we're a data center operator and build-to-suit provider. We have three categories: federal, enterprise, and hyperscale. Some of you we've worked together with. Today it's my pleasure to introduce our panel. We're going to be talking about why latency matters in the era of serving content at the speed of light, edge data center landscape, and the importance of cloud security. I'm going to call out our panelists, and if you would just come up here and just sit right here to my left, and then I'll have our moderator sit to the right. First, I would like to call up Kevin Egge from Akamai, Krishna Narayanaswamy from Netskope, Jezebel Gilmore from Packet Fabric, Jason Black, NVIDIA, wow, this is like a who's who, and Sarah Keller from Uber. And then lastly, our moderator, Sanford McMurtry, if he could come up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here's your panel. Enjoy the discussion.
All right. Thank you, Dave, and thank you, everyone, for being here, especially Dr. Cerf. Thank you for everything you've done to make this possible, along with Vinay, for this particular conference. Really appreciate it. I think we have a great panel here. It'd be great if maybe we say a few words about your companies, just a little bit more of an introduction, if you don't mind. Sarah?
I'm Sarah Keller. I manage our technology, sourcing, and supply chain. For those who don't know Uber, obviously we have a mobile app, gives you rides. That's probably most people's familiarity. Perhaps you know we deliver food too. But the parts that you may not realize is that we also have quite a few products that are related to freight, that are related to how things are being transported. We have connected city products, so we do quite a bit around how cities are interoperating, how public transportation works in those cities. And bringing that all together under a single platform, my team is responsible for all of that infrastructure and the products and our third-party services.
Hi, my name is Jason Black, and I'm representing NVIDIA and IEIC at the same time. I come from NVIDIA more recently than not because I used to work with Sarah back at Uber, but I left about a year ago to join NVIDIA because they have moved more from a hardware vendor. Many may know that NVIDIA produces GPUs. For those of you with kids, they probably ask for some sort of GeForce Now card to do some sort of gaming, but we're much more than that. We enable data scientists and high-speed computing to be able to run certain models, to be able to enable things like the COVID vaccine to come to market much quicker because computers are just that much quicker than humans. So we are building out a platform and much more than that with data center connectivity around the world, being much closer to data scientists and being able to enable compute at a much quicker rate, much closer to them. So my team is responsible for the global network connectivity and all the way down to the rack and getting the compute environment to be much more scalable long term.
Hi. Hi. I am Jezebel Gilmore. I am the Chief Commercial Officer of Packet Fabric, and we are a fully automated network as a service provider. And what Sarah and Jason had said, that in bringing infrastructure, tying the compute and data centers together, we are at scale and we are on demand. So bringing automation to the world to allow application layer to be utilizing the computer resources that are distributed across the globe.
Good morning. My name is Krishna Narayanaswamy. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO of Netskope. We are a cloud security company. Organizations, both public and private, are transforming their security deployments because of two reasons. One is the pandemic has caused remote work as more normal, and the second is the adoption of SaaS and public cloud has made security deployments in organizations' data centers no longer relevant. The most efficient way of delivering security is in the cloud, and that's where Netskope comes in. And one of the things that we have learned through our existence is that delivering security, you need to build an optimized edge cloud. And that's what Netskope has built, and that's where my interest in being here today. We now operate one of the largest security clouds, which covers over 60 metro regions throughout the world, hosted in carrier-neutral data centers and peered with most of the peering exchanges, right? So glad to be here and look forward to the discussion today.
Hi, my name is Kevin Egge, and I work at Akamai Technologies. We're arguably the world's largest content delivery network, but we also have overlaid security services and have entered the compute space. I run a team of engineers that manages capacity optimization. So we slice and dice all of the capacity deployed in all the data centers around the world and make sure it's available for products. And we also articulate traffic control policy for Akamai's products globally.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Again, we have a great panel here. It's wonderful that we cover kind of all the different spectra within the industry, which is something we'll expand on a little bit more as we go through this. I always find it super interesting in that, you know, when we talk about the demand and what drives the need for improvements on the edge and technology, it really does come down to just the demand and the innovation that's happening, right? You think back to the beginning days of the internet and the, you know, the baud modems and things like that when you were first dialing in, and you just go to say to yourself, no one would put up with that these days, right? We've kind of created a beast, right? We've created a little bit of a monster in what we've done with the internet, all for the good, but really that demand just continues to expand. In many ways, you know, I always kind of use the term content, and especially content and applications are king in terms of what people need and want to have access to. So maybe we can spend a little bit of time talking about, you know, what's going on in, Kevin, in your world in terms of, sorry, Jason, in your world as it relates to artificial intelligence and some of the other kind of software technology requirements that are happening.
Sure. So one of the things that we focus on very heavily certainly is artificial intelligence, machine learning, and rendering farms. So something like the metaverse, which hopefully many have heard of at this point, where we're taking a 2D world and making it more 3D. We are underpinning a lot of that, we meaning NVIDIA, are underpinning a lot of that with GPUs, high performance computing. And some of the things that we're doing is, if you've listened to something called GTC, which is our global conference that happens twice a year, our CEO gets out there and talks about the technology roadmap. I encourage folks to look that up on YouTube. And there's the beginnings of those speeches basically start out talking about where we're going and what we're doing with trying to get this rendered 3D world. So we're working very closely with companies that have, we'll say, almost like assembly lines, and we're creating what we call a digital twin of that. And what that allows us to do is pinpoint where there are inefficiencies in these lines, and the digital world is pinpointing that to the point where we can state that if you do X versus Y, it will be this much more efficient and get you to a solution that much quicker. So the companies that are, you know, investing in that are not investing in having to build out infrastructure and then have to rebuild infrastructure, retool, re-automate, and whatnot. And this is getting us to a much better state in a quicker amount of time to build it out in this digital world and then go do the actual build out. So, you know, one of the things I want to point out, not to be on a soapbox, but it was mentioned in one of the last panels that we need a lot of talent. So speaking to the folks in the back of the room, yet again, not to point you guys out for a fourth time, but one of the things that I want to state is automation should absolutely help do everything that we can possibly let it do, but we don't want it to stand in the way of understanding what's happening behind the scenes with technology. Because one thing I hear more often than not is, oh, it broke. Somebody who wrote the code isn't here today, or somebody who wrote the code doesn't work here any longer. What do we do? And that's not a safe place to be in, to not understand what's happening behind the scenes. We have to make it more efficient to do our jobs, but not let it do our jobs for us to the point of being crippled. So AI, ML, a lot of these things come into play with automation, of course, but we have to understand what's going on behind the scenes to be more efficient, to get us to a much better state. And these assembly line processes that we're improving upon are certainly more innovative and getting companies to be in a better place in a much quicker time and less of a cost. And all of that is going to rely on the infrastructure that we build across the globe. And so that relies on data center space, power, cooling, the connectivity that was talked about in the last panel, being much closer to the consumer, to the edge, to be able to consume artificial intelligence.
You brought up the edge. I think that's probably a good segue into how we define the edge, right? And kind of the ever-moving target, so to speak, of what the edge is in most platforms. Sarah, do you want to talk a little bit about Uber and maybe what you guys consider the edge?
Yeah. So I think in a traditional telecom world, people thought of edge in your connectivity mindset. But I think as technology users, you now have to realize the edge is sitting in your pocket, right? You've got a device that 10 years ago would have been in servers. That you now have ready and available. And if you think about that connectivity that's necessary to make that happen, it's put a lot of strain on, let's call it aging ecosystems, and particularly in urban dense areas where upgrades you can't just trench in downtown London, right? Like these are places where it gets really problematic. So if you think about the Uber story, obviously we have to solve for the mobile device that's sitting in your pocket. We have to solve for, how we connect restaurants to eaters. We have to connect IT devices that are sitting in autonomous vehicles, and those become how you would end an autonomous ride that was not going correctly. And then you start going down all of these IoT devices, scooters, bikes, now thinking about transit turnstiles where people's tickets are now happening like on their phone connected through a multi-trip. So for us, the edge has to think through a hybrid strategy. And if I were just talking about the US, that'd be great, but I'm global. I'm serving in over 10,000 cities in the world. Infrastructure is not built consistently. So I now have to plan for that lowest common denominator edge to make sure that that seamless interaction is feeling the same way, whether you were in Africa or you were in Europe or if you were right here in this country. So I do think that this is one of those problem statements that people don't really think of that edge. I think technology-wise, we think of the practical reality of serving at that traffic. I actually think if you're not building your stack to think about all of the infrastructure connections, you end up in a real problem from performance, from latency, and actually just your ability to serve.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I mean, it seems what's happening, right, is the technology at the edge is advancing quicker than the actual infrastructure, right? So one of the challenges in the industry is really the infrastructure itself. And one of the terms I like to use is we're plumbers, right? We're plumbers of the internet. We're connecting pipes to make sure that traffic or water, hopefully it's water, goes through as efficiently as possible. But imagine a scenario where instead of one plumber coming to work at your house, you have 12 plumbers who come to work at your house. And they all do their own thing. And you're expecting them to somehow make their pipes connect in the most efficient way possible without a roadmap. We've been basically operating that way since 1996, right? So in a way, what we're trying to do is figure out how to reverse engineer in some ways that infrastructure and make it possible so that all these applications will work well. Maybe let's talk a little bit, let's bring in Kevin. Do you want to talk a little bit about, kind of the role of a CDN in helping to kind of unwind some of that mess with the infrastructure?
Yeah, sure. So, Akamai, as you know, is a CDN, and, we really solved the founders of the company sit down and solve the challenge that Tim Berners-Lee had laid out at the onset of the internet, that the infrastructure in the middle got completely congested. And so what content delivery networks do is they cache the content locally. And so if I think about where the edge is in managing our capacity in the CDN, it's wherever the eyeballs are. And that's really been, the challenges around that are that, there's three movements of demand that kind of shift what's happening. So we have, content in the form of bits. So that's your, most of the data that gets transmitted through the wire. But we also have the ability to, so that's the bandwidth and the pipes and the undersea cables and the connectivity between the data centers. But you also have the compute vector of the resources that we have to manage as well. That's starting to surge. Edge compute is becoming more and more important. And now we've got this new challenge that we need to solve is we have to build more and more compute closer to where the eyeball networks are. And then the third vector that exploded during COVID, and this is a human behavior offset, as people retreated to their houses and they started consuming content online, tons and tons of online videos. And all those videos, to store them close to the end users, that requires storage, right? So now our needs are constantly shifting in the CDN in terms of these three resource vectors and how we build for that. And keeping up with that has been the primary challenge over the past couple of years.
Finding aggregation points and making sure that we are building out to what the ever evolving edge is, right? I mean, in the U.S., the current infrastructure is still mainly dependent on the kind of 9 major metros. That's obviously expanded over the last few years, where you have major peering points in places like Houston and Pittsburgh and Minneapolis and Detroit, but that hasn't happened quite as quickly as maybe to keep up with some of the demand there and avoid congestion. Maybe Jezebel, you could speak a little bit about what Packet Fabric is doing to help with that underlying infrastructure when you talk about network as a service.
Sure. What's interesting, we talk about edge, and you can't have edge without the core, and if you don't know where the edge is, how are you supposed to connect that? And what Sarah had said is, the edge could be in your pocket, in your hand, but we don't necessarily see it that way right now, right? How we are looking at the edge is where the eyeball is connecting to. And so coming from either the CDN or the securities perspective, the closer you have the compute to the eyeballs, the easier it is for you to get that content, that data, to be served to those users. Well, what we always overlook is infrastructure. The reason why it's called infrastructure is because there's a physical element to it. And everybody's so hyped up about, network as code. Well, that's great. But how are you actually going to deliver that information over software without the physical infrastructure? And I think we just talked about the infrastructure itself in North America is aging out. And most of the ISPs that you think of where you get your data from don't want to make the investment into the physical infrastructure and the breakout of the last mile physical data. So your data that you're getting on your phone or here through the Wi-Fi is likely being served out of somewhere else that isn't local to you. And so with that said, everybody on this panel is working to drive having that data be local to as close to you as possible. But that requires somebody to make an investment, and it is not a small investment. We're talking about buying new gear to upgrade physical infrastructure to run ISPs. We're talking about potentially building in additional power and resiliency in data centers in the last mile. And moreover, you're looking at architectural upgrades for entire networks that are serving live customers today that could cause service outages, right? You're looking at implementing automation guess what? When you have to implement automation, you have to upgrade the entire back end of your network. And that is a forklift and a half for most companies. And not only that they don't want to make the investment, they don't even want to think about it. So we talk about edge and what is edge and what we're doing about edge. There has to be an economic driving force and someone that is willing to put in investment. And when we make the investment, whoever makes the investment is going to want to have some return of that investment. And who are the ones that's really going to be benefiting from the investment? Is it us, as users? Are we getting enough data on our mobile devices? Are your kids, seeing enough YouTubes and playing video games at home? Or are they getting education at home? Or moreover, is it companies like Meta or Google or, who's benefiting from that investment? And so we all have to think about how we're going to make edge a reality and who are the players and who are the benefactors and who are the benefactees of really deploying in the edge.
So I want to just add one other part, and I think people are aware of this from a broader perspective, but the companies that were making this investment pre-COVID now have a massive advantage compared to the people who are now just starting. And in fact, one of the biggest issues from a supply chain perspective is that equipment, that transmission equipment, the compute edge, anything related to how you would really be serving. If you didn't make a plan for that, just to put this in context for people who may not be super familiar, you just see the headlines. Equipment that used to take you 2 months to 4 months to get in is now taking you 2 years. So start thinking about the generational loss that happens with that and the implications from that investment. So in many cases, I think people realize that they got caught flat-footed, to Jezebel's point. Those people needed to make that investment. Now it will take you 2 years to start actually materializing benefit from the investment you start today. So I just think it's an important add-on to your points, Jez.
Yeah, now I want to chime in too, to piggyback that. So exactly what Sarah said. We all placed orders preemptively just knowing that supply chain was going to be terrible. And the problem is now I feel like we're behind in where we want to be, behind the curve. So where I would have implemented 400 gig connectivity a year or two ago, I am now landing gear that I ordered a year or two ago, which is 100 gig. And that means that I am effectively deploying what will be tech debt. And that's terrible. And it's not just me, it's we across the board. But what do we do to solve for that? And then the other thing that I wanted to touch on is something that you had mentioned, because I'm heavily invested in like decentralization versus the centralized area that we're in now. And that whole decentralization is great, but the one thing that we have to keep focused on is that we have to build standards around that decentralization, or everybody's going to build out their own vision and strategy of what that looks like, and that's just unmanageable. But I'm totally on board with what you're saying.
And go ahead.
That's okay. I just wanted to add that the importance of edge is also seen in cloud security, which is where we play. User experience, right, when people are uploading files to Google Drive or OneDrive, depends on the end-to-end latency that is experienced when that activity takes place. And so controlling that end-to-end activity and providing the security becomes a challenge. And what we have learned in the past many years is investing in building out that edge for delivering security, because security is not like an application. You need to inspect traffic and it has to go somewhere, to Google Drive or to Salesforce, right? Building that edge on the front end close to the eyeball networks, and at the same time peering, I cannot emphasize more on the peering on the back end to all the service providers, be it Amazon, Google, Microsoft, right? Makes that end-to-end user experience much more richer. We have had a lot of feedback telling that users who are going through this engineered network get better performance than going through the internet, right? So there's a lot of importance in paying attention to that building out the edge and making all those peering connections on the back end to get that good user experience.
I'm just going to add that I absolutely agree that the coming together, the collaboration between networks and between all the ecosystem partners is so important, and that's why we're all sitting here at IEIC, right? Because we're all part of the ecosystem trying to make the internet a better place. But what Jason had said really resonated with me is there has to be interoperability between all the networks. There's got to be standards that we're all building towards. It can't be like what Sandy just said. You can't have 12 plumbers all coming to the same building their own system and hoping that, your toilet flushed to their system. I mean, sorry to sound so graphic, but that's a terrible way of building infrastructure and utilizing resources. We have to be able to do better and figure out how we can leverage collaboration to build a better world for ourselves.
Yeah, thank you, guys. I think at some point, that is the biggest challenge for the industry, right? I think we have all the smart people necessary to figure things out. It really is going to come down to, the economics, the commercials that can be worked out, and how we, split that pie, so to speak, so that the functioning of the internet becomes the primary goal of everyone. CFOs won't want to hear that, right? And shareholders won't want to hear that because we're all really here to maximize shareholder benefit. But at the end of the day, I think we're going to be forced, in order to make everything continue to work, to take on that spirit of cooperation, right? And making sure that we care more about the bits and the performance to the end user than we necessarily do for the maximizing profit. Maximizing profit is kind of where we were when telephones and everything were monopolized, right? Now that we have this kind of conglomeration of networks, we've got to figure out how to make them work not only just for our own companies but for the end users, right? Peering, actually, when Dr. Cerf said that Google peers with 8,000 networks or companies, I kind of knew, no company, no matter how big you are, Google or not, can do everything they need to do by themselves, right? I mean, that's the reality of the world we live in now. We all have to interconnect. We all need to peer. We all need to cooperate. Finding that sweet spot on the financials is going to be the challenge I see going forward. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to the point about peering. The peering landscape is changing. So we've got, there's a technology offset that's hit the mobile network operators, which is 5G. The bandwidth that each individual consumer is drawing down, that's becoming prohibitively expensive for those mobile network operators to build the backbone infrastructure to backhaul that. Sandy talked about, we used to think of the US market as kind of 9 major metros, and you'd build your big lumps of capacity in those 9 metros, and then you'd have some smaller deployments. Akamai has smaller deployments that are primarily engineered towards the bit resource vector, but compute's not going to fit there. And so what you're going to see is this shift to want to peer in the smaller cities. We're going to be expanding way out past those 9 major metros, into areas like Richmond and Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Pittsburgh. Don't take offense to this, but we refer to them as tier 2 cities. But you're going to see the need for compute infrastructure to be housed in those cities, and the connectivity between the data centers and both north-south, between the major metros and those cities, and east-west between the cities themselves, as people continue to build applications and services that consume more and more resources. The reason this is important is because of performance, right? Dr. Cerf will be the first one to tell you, the lower that round trip time is on a packet switch network, the more throughput you can get. There's a constraint. If it's too far away, there's sort of a maximum speed you can achieve for data transfer, and that's why we really, for the next generation of applications that need to be hyper performant, you have to be close.
I just want to add on to Kevin's point. IoT is changing a lot of this. In the traditional kind of mobile infrastructure, web infrastructure, you could go through your normal kind of edge paths. You now find companies making investments in really unique ways of serving to that edge, because you need to now create connectivity with all of these unique device points that are pulling together. So you see connectivity happening through grocery stores. You see connectivity happening in IDF buildings that used to just be like for your corporate connectivity hub, now actually becoming a serving stack. And so one of the interesting aspects is like even that nature of thinking of things as POPs or data centers, we are now seeing a massive shift in what is a POP, what is a data center. And IoT is driving a ton of that demand signal, because the amount of congestion that happens when people are sharing the same cellular tower or people are sharing the same sort of fiber footprint, you now need to create more diversity. And so in metros, that becomes a big driver of really kind of shifting how we think and the types of products we're building for those types of applications.
Yeah, I'll just tack onto that one as well. For those from the IT world, when you use the term QoS, everybody thinks of quality of service. But I've shifted that Q to quantity of service for exactly what she's talking about. Everybody in their homes has 50 to 100 devices, or whatever Dr. Cerf had pointed out earlier. But I know I have about 75 devices, including my refrigerator, which is ridiculous, but whatever. The point being is that we have to build quicker and better and more reliable services to be able to keep up with that demand, and not try to queue it because one thing is not more important than the other. Everything's important to everybody for some reason.
I'll just add that getting the bits from one place to the other fast is important, but at the same time, you need to get it securely, right? What we are finding is more and more threat actors are using SaaS applications or public cloud to bypass security measures. And so it's very important whether the data is coming from a public cloud or a SaaS application or even websites, right, to ensure that it's securely delivered to the destination. And applying the security is not free. Obviously, there is some cost to it, and that's where engineering the network and ensuring that the hits that you take by inspecting traffic to make sure it's secure is not seen by the user in terms of the performance.
And I'm just going to say that from the security and privacy perspective, right, you want to have quality of service and reliability of service and security. Well, then what are you giving up potentially? You could be giving up your privacy or your own infrastructure. There are applications and technologies today that allows sharing of capacity at home on your phone. Do you feel good about that? Are you feeling comfortable utilizing that technology? I think Amazon was working on some of that, and we saw a huge shut off of their devices from their user base, right? Is that a problem for you? And where does your privacy stand? And so all of those are questions I think most people who are not in our industry have yet to contemplate. So it's really important that we together come together and figure out a way to make this happen, because everybody's talking about metaverse this, metaverse that. It's great. It's there's a lot of different use cases, but metaverse cannot happen if we don't actually upgrade the edge infrastructure, the last mile infrastructure, to make it possible.
Yeah, it's scary. Like I said in the beginning, I think we've created a little bit of a monster in ourselves. Heaven forbid I reach under the lampshade and turn the light off with my hand. I have to now, tell my Google Home to turn off my lights instead. So yeah, again, it's one of the reasons, having IEIC and even all our other conferences, I'm confident that as we go through this, we'll all kind of figure it out together. We'll be forced to, right? Because, add in the kind of social engineering parts of this and the things that can be scary. If anyone's ever seen the series Black Mirror, you kind of see where, there's things that we can do that don't necessarily mean we should do from a technology standpoint, right? Because we start, jeopardizing lives in some cases, right? So, all very good points. I do want to spend a little bit more time, if we do, on security. Maybe Krishna, you want to expand a little bit more on some of your comments?
Sure. Yeah. So one of the things that we are observing is remote work is here to stay. And so even though offices are open, there's kind of hybrid work, what we call, and delivering security becomes very important. The old ways of working, if you're working at work, you have your VPN where you open up your VPN in order to get to the resources. Now, to be honest with you, most of the resources in organizations are all in the cloud. They're either as SaaS applications or in the public cloud, in the hyperscalers. And so what we are observing is this need to transform security, right, and deliver security in the cloud. But at the same time, what we are also observing is threat actors, as I said, are using the cloud to deliver their attacks. So overall, I think the whole security ecosystem is moving towards what is known as zero trust security architectures, where trust but verify, make sure that all the context of a user, where are they coming from, which device are they using, what application are they going to, and what kind of resource are they accessing, right? It's not about opening the door, but once you open the door to the application, observing what goes in and out as users upload and download files become important, because more and more regulations like GDPR, it started out in Europe. You have CCPA in California, and more states are talking about privacy regulations. As more and more digital transformation happens, more of our private data, sensitive data, is held by many other resources, and it is very important to safeguard them, right? And that's where I think you see the future of security with all these zero trust architectures, and ensuring that data is protected and used only by the resources that need to access them becomes very important.
Thank you. Sarah, did you? No? Okay. Yeah, maybe Kevin, maybe talk a little bit about Akamai. I know, having spent 10 years there, that a lot of the evolution with Akamai has been on, DDoS mitigation, et cetera.
Yeah, certainly. Akamai is a leader in the security space, and I think it lends itself primarily to the fact that it was CDN first. One of the things that a CDN gives you is an incredibly large attack surface. So for application layer denial of service attacks on, if somebody's got their content being delivered through Akamai, our attack surface is so large that the largest scale DDoS attacks in the world, this is going to sound silly, but I literally can't even see them on my graphs. They just don't even register or show up, and so that's an incredibly powerful tool to push that security boundary all the way out to the edge, right next to the eyeballs. But as the Akamai business has evolved, we've gotten more into the enterprise space, and now we're peeling back layers of entering into the compute space. We're going to have a new class of clients that are building their application stack, their infrastructure, their back-end infrastructure, all on Akamai, and then connecting that out to the delivery products. And then we're going to have to put solutions in place that ensure security from what I would say is the content origin all the way to the eyeballs. And if you think about a multi-tenant cloud environment, and security inside the data center, historically, you can't really control or regulate the level of security that's built into each individual application that people are sort of building as they provision resources in your cloud stack. So I think the future is going to be, as Christian said, this more zero trust framework that moves away from an infrastructure-based security solution, because in the old world, you had to have some kind of device or something outside of the application to ensure that security boundary and enforce that policy. And what we're doing at Akamai is, I think one of the most exciting things that we're doing is in the micro-segmentation space, where the application layer is sitting on top of the security layer. And so there's a policy enforcement of what's allowed to happen if an application is running in a cloud stack. That in an enterprise or a company, or even us as a vendor, we can set that policy beforehand, where we trust, but we're going to verify and make sure everything is secure under the hood.
So one of the unique parts of my role, and probably the thing I like the most, is I have to spend a lot of time looking at a partner solution base That partner solution base takes all of these different ideas from all of these different companies about how to bring security and how do I bring it into my own product. And not just to security, it's I'm driving for performance, I'm driving for price efficiencies. The one part that's interesting, and I think people overlook, is there's not any one solution that solves for all things. Like, I can't just go 100% to the cloud and give the keys to Google or Amazon and assume it'll work. It doesn't work. And so one of the big pieces that you have to do is think about these things as knitted solutions. I have to stack solutions on top of each other, and then in that zero trust mindset, I have to build my own solutions to overlay the things that don't interoperate or don't work correctly. They're one of the biggest problems I have with engineering, and I say this lovingly, is that they don't trust necessarily everything built under the hood. And that's good, actually, because one of the big problem statements is I think we sit in a lot of marketing where we see a lot of really great concepts, great ideas, but things aren't fully baked. And so you don't know what you don't know until you're in the middle of a security incident. You don't know what you don't know until your product stops working, and now you're responsible to your shareholders for poor strategy, decision, and making processes. So when you start thinking about that from like an end user perspective or from like a content provider perspective, this becomes, I think, the more challenging part. And I did want to pick up on one thing you said about, kind of this like almost frenemy style world of like getting to a standard. It used to be that infrastructure was competitive, right? You'd go by a Google data center and the lights were off, right? Because you couldn't see what was going on inside the hood. Now we are going to have to rely on each other in a more direct way, because that same sort of base infrastructure that people aren't investing in, that Jezebel had brought into, we're all sharing the same space. We're all sharing the same towers. We're all sharing the same subsea cables. So if you're not trusting and working together to create that stacked view, how are you actually going to make it to your next generation? How are you going to get there? So I think this is one of those places we don't spend enough time really thinking about it. We talk about our own product differentiation without actually clearly articulating, like, how are you putting this together?
Yeah, great, thank you. I will be forced to do that. I mean, again, I know we're just about out of time. I was just going to kind of maybe quickly, if you've got a 3 to 5 word comment around what your biggest challenges might be going forward, we can talk about that a little bit. I'll start a little bit with this. So I now work for QTS Data Centers, and one of the things that we try to push on is, and we've heard this a few times in terms of partnering, we don't want to just be a data center. We don't want to just be providing space and power. We want to be integrated into the network planning and network deployments that happen with our partners, right? We want to always use that partner word. Yes, we are vendors. Yes, we have customers. Yes, we will collect money. Yes, they will collect money from us at certain instances. But again, the overriding tenor needs to be partnership from a networking standpoint, because otherwise things fail. Anyone else want to chime in?
I just want to conclude by telling, like, when I look at cybersecurity, I think one of the biggest challenges that we are seeing is shortage of expertise and professionals, right? So again, looking back at the younger generation out there, I think it's an awesome field to be in, a lot of exciting, changing things. So please do consider a career in cybersecurity.
Good job. Kevin, real quick.
Yeah, I think that the two biggest things that I worry about is the loss of institutional knowledge, right? The complexity of how this stuff runs has just it's spiraled out of control in the last 10 years, and getting that next generation of people that are going to be able to keep up with it, absolutely, that's mission number one. I think the second biggest thing I worry about is in terms of, I have like this very single-minded view of the world around the different resources vectors, and the shifts between the resource vectors when we punch out and something becomes compute intensive or disk intensive or bit intensive, and how fast that happens. Keeping up with that is just the challenge.
I guess for me, it's more about demand planning and understanding where we're headed. I think that's one thing that we as an industry probably don't do very well. We throw darts at a board with a best guess. And then the second thing for me is really working together with your vendors as partners and not that just a customer relationship, because what you're driving from web scale or otherwise will help to lead those vendors to develop the products that we could all consume, to get on the same page, going to what Sarah and Jezebel just stated. Because if we have a very diverse build strategy, then not only do you have the problem of supporting it, for yourself, but as Kevin was just stating, with the institutional knowledge, you're having people try to learn at every time, every time they make a step, right? And let's face it, there's a lot of folks that leave companies, 3 to 5 year cycles or whatever that case is, and they're having to start over. And that's great, you're learning a lot, but it doesn't help the company necessarily that you're going to until you ramp up. So I think there's a lot of gain in that.
I think for our side, one of the biggest risks that we're seeing is compliance as tax revenue strategies in like municipalities. It really affects how you start thinking about infrastructure, deployment strategies, et cetera. That is keeping us up at night, because you don't know if you make a bad decision now, that's a 10 to 20 year investment, and now you're going to pick up and make that same investment in a small geography that you may not have made that same type of investment in. So I do think that as an open internet standards, why you cannot change policy, this is I think a policy that will change how the internet works.
So many great things said across the board, and to me at Packet Fabric, we are really just tying the physical infrastructure, making it more available for the consumers, whether it is company like Akamai or Netscope that's trying to deliver security solutions, or Uber and NVIDIA. And to make the physical infrastructure consumable sounds like aren't the telcos already doing that? Like they own the asset, right? It's actually much harder than you think. And when the telco provides that service, you're blind on the other side. You have no idea what you're getting and when it's going to come and how you can consume it better. To me, the challenge today is to work with everyone in the ecosystem where they have access to the data that we can provide through the infrastructure that we run in a fully automated and on-demand fashion, and so that they can be empowered to do a better job at whatever it is that's their core competency.
All right, great. I apologize, I know we're a little over time, but obviously this is a conversation that could go on for 3 days, 8 days, 10 weeks. So hopefully we'll continue this at other conferences and as we continue through our job. So join me, give a round of applause for the panel, and thank you all very much.